The photograph hit the marble floor like a gunshot. Glass scattered across my kitchen tiles, each shard catching the morning light like tiny accusations. My sister Elena stood in my doorway, her designer heels clicking against the fragments as she stepped inside uninvited. 6 months. 6 months since Marcus died in that hospital room, his hand growing cold in mine while machines flatlined around us. 6 months of drowning in grief, so thick I could barely breathe. And now Elena was here, holding a baby that looked exactly like my dead husband. The infant couldn't have been more than 3 months old. Dark hair. Those unmistakable gray eyes that had haunted my dreams since Marcus left me. The same eyes that used to look at me across our breakfast table, promising forever when forever turned out to be a lie. Elena shifted the baby higher on her hip, that familiar smirk playing at her lips. The same expression she'd worn when she stole my prom date. When she got the promotion I'd worked for. When she convinced our parents I was the dramatic one, the jealous sister who couldn't handle her success. But this was different. She wasn't even trying to hide her satisfaction. Elena had always been beautiful in that effortless way that made men forget their own names. Perfect blonde waves where I had unruly brown curls. Curves in all the right places where I was all sharp angles and nervous energy. She'd married young, divorced twice, and somehow always landed on her feet with a bigger bank account than before. The baby gurgled, reaching tiny fingers toward the light streaming through my windows. Windows that Marcus had installed himself last spring, cursing at the measurements while I held the level and tried not to laugh at his determination to do everything perfectly. Everything except staying faithful, apparently. My throat felt like sandpaper. When I finally found my voice, it came out as a whisper. "Whose baby is that?" Elena's smile widened. She looked around my living room like she was appraising it, taking inventory of everything Marcus had left behind. The leather couch we'd picked out together. The wine collection he'd been so proud of. The family photos lining the mantel, our faces frozen in happier times when I believed in the man I'd married. "This is Madison." Elena's voice carried that sing-song quality she used when she knew she held all the cards. "Marcus's daughter." The words hit me like physical blows. Each syllable carved another piece out of what remained of my heart. I gripped the kitchen counter behind me, my knuckles white against the granite. Marcus's daughter. Not our daughter. His daughter with my sister. The baby babbled, completely oblivious to the bomb that had just detonated in my life. She was beautiful in that devastating way that made my chest tight with longing and rage. Every feature was Marcus, down to the tiny dimple in her chin that appeared when she smiled. Elena continued, her voice casual as if she was discussing the weather. "I know this is a shock, but we need to talk about Marcus's estate." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle between us. "About Madison's inheritance. $25 million. That's what Marcus had left behind. Oil investments that had paid off bigger than anyone expected. Property in 3 states. A trust fund that was supposed to secure our future children. Children I'd wanted so desperately that I'd undergone 3 years of fertility treatments, each failed attempt another crack in my already fragile hope. And now Elena stood in my kitchen, holding the child I'd never been able to give him. My legs felt unsteady. I needed to sit down, but I refused to show weakness in front of her. Not now. Not when she was obviously here for more than just shocking announcements. "You want money, it wasn't a question." Elena's expression shifted slightly, the mask slipping just enough to reveal the calculation underneath. "Madison deserves her father's legacy. I'm not unreasonable. I know you two were married, but blood is blood. Blood is blood." The phrase hung in the air like a curse. I forced myself to look at the baby again. Really look. The resemblance to Marcus was undeniable, but something nagged at me. The timeline felt wrong. Marcus had died 6 months ago after a brief illness. Elena claimed the baby was 3 months old. That would mean. When did this happen? My voice was steadier now, the initial shock giving way to something sharper. When did you and Marcus? Elena's pause lasted a beat too long. Does it matter? What matters is that Madison exists. She's his child, and she deserves what's rightfully hers. But it did matter. It mattered because Marcus and I had been trying to have a baby right up until he got sick. It mattered because he'd held my hand in that hospital bed and sworn I was the only woman he'd ever loved. It mattered because even in his pain medication haze, he'd whispered promises about growing old together. Either he was the most convincing liar I'd ever met, or something else was happening here. Elena set her purse down on my kitchen island with the confidence of someone who expected to be staying a while. The baby started fussing, and she bounced her gently, that maternal instinct I'd always envied coming so naturally to her. "I've spoken to a lawyer," she said, not meeting my eyes. "Madison has a legitimate claim to half the estate. Maybe more, considering she's Marcus's only child." The words stung exactly as they were intended to. Only child. The reminder of my own failures, my empty womb, my broken promises to give Marcus the family he'd wanted. But something was still wrong with her story. Elena was many things, but she wasn't stupid. She wouldn't show up here making demands unless she believed she had the upper hand. Unless she had proof. "Where's your proof?" I asked. Elena reached into her purse and pulled out a birth certificate. Madison Rose Thompson. Father listed as Marcus James Thompson. My Marcus. My life. Reduced to black ink on official paper. The document looked real, but documents could be forged. What couldn't be faked was the baby's obvious resemblance to Marcus. Unless a memory surfaced. Elena at our wedding, flirting shamelessly with Marcus's younger brother David. David, who shared Marcus's coloring, his build, even that same dimpled chin. David, who had always been a little wild, a little irresponsible with women and money and promises he couldn't keep. David, who had been at Marcus's funeral, avoiding my eyes and leaving early without saying goodbye. I studied Elena's face, searching for tells. She'd always been good at lying, but she had patterns. She touched her neck when she was nervous. She spoke a little too fast when she was covering something up. She avoided direct eye contact when the lie was particularly elaborate. Right now, she was doing all three. "I want a DNA test," I said. Elena's hand flew to her throat. "That's unnecessary. Look at her. She's obviously Marcus's daughter." "Then you won't mind proving it." The baby chose that moment to start crying, her wails filling the tense silence between us. Elena rocked her, making soothing sounds, but I could see the panic creeping into her eyes. "This is about grief," she said, her voice taking on that practiced, sympathetic tone. "I understand you're having trouble accepting this. But Marcus is gone, and Madison needs stability. She needs her inheritance secured. She needs her real father identified." Elena's face went pale beneath her carefully applied makeup. For just a moment, she looked genuinely afraid. Then the mask slipped back into place, but I'd seen enough. My sister had always been good at playing the victim when her schemes fell apart. But she'd made a critical error this time. She'd underestimated how well I knew her, and she'd overestimated how much grief had clouded my judgment. I wasn't the same woman who'd let her steal boyfriends and opportunities without fighting back. Marcus's death had burned away a lot of things, but it had also forged something harder in me. Something she hadn't counted on. "Get out of my house," I said quietly. Elena's eyes flashed with anger. "You can't just ignore this. Madison has rights. Madison has a right to know who her father really is. And I have a right to protect my husband's memory from whatever con you're trying to run." She gathered up the baby and her purse, her movements sharp with frustration. At the door, she turned back, and for a moment I saw something that looked almost like desperation. "You're making a mistake," she said. "This doesn't have to be complicated. We could work something out. Split the estate. Everyone gets what they need. Everyone except Marcus, who deserves better than having his name on a lie." After she left, I stood in my kitchen surrounded by broken glass, my reflection fractured in a dozen pieces on the floor. The house felt too quiet, too empty, like it had every day since Marcus died. But now the emptiness had a different quality. It wasn't just grief anymore. It was anticipation. I pulled out my phone and made 2 calls. The first was to Marcus's lawyer, Harold Bennett, a man who'd known my husband since college and had zero patience for family drama. The second was to a private investigator I'd found online, a woman named Sarah Chen, whose reviews praised her discretion and her ability to uncover truths that people desperately wanted to keep buried. Harold answered on the second ring. His voice carried the weight of someone who'd spent 40 years dealing with grieving widows and greedy relatives. "I wondered when this would happen," he said after I explained Elena's visit. "Marcus always said your sister was trouble." The words sent a small shock through me. "He talked about Elena?" "Mentioned her a few times. Nothing specific, but he was concerned about her influence on you. Said she had a way of making you doubt yourself. Even from the grave, Marcus was still trying to protect me." The thought brought tears to my eyes, but also strengthened my resolve. "What do I need to do?" I asked. "Legally? Nothing yet. She hasn't filed any claims. But if that baby is Marcus's, she'll have grounds for a significant portion of the estate. If it's not," Harold's voice trailed off meaningfully, "then what? Then she's committed fraud on a scale that could land her in prison." After hanging up with Harold, I sat in Marcus's study, surrounded by his books and papers and the lingering scent of his cologne on the jacket he'd never taken to the dry cleaner. This room had always been his sanctuary, and now it felt like a war room. Sarah Chen called back within an hour. Her voice was crisp, professional, with just a hint of intrigue that suggested she found my situation personally interesting. "DNA testing is straightforward," she explained. "The tricky part is getting a sample from the baby without alerting your sister. But there are ways, if you're willing to get creative." I was willing to get more than creative. I was willing to do whatever it took to uncover the truth. Sarah's plan was elegant in its simplicity. Elena would need to bring the baby around again, probably within a few days, when she realized I wasn't going to just roll over and accept her story. When she did, I'd be ready. The waiting was the hardest part. Every hour felt like a week. Every phone ring made my heart race. I cleaned the house obsessively, as if scrubbing away dust could somehow clean away the mess Elena had made of my life. On the third day, she called. "We need to talk." Her voice was tight with frustration. "I've been patient, but this has gone on long enough." "Then come over. Bring Madison." An hour later, Elena was back in my kitchen, the baby in her arms and a folder of documents on my counter. She'd brought reinforcements this time, legal papers that supposedly proved her case. But I'd brought reinforcements too. "I've thought about what you said," I told her, pouring coffee into 2 mugs. "About splitting the estate. Maybe we can work something out." Elena's shoulders relaxed slightly. She'd always been easy to manipulate when she thought she was getting what she wanted. While we talked, I played the grieving widow, the confused sister, the woman who was slowly coming around to accepting Elena's version of reality. I offered to hold the baby, marveling again at her resemblance to Marcus, while carefully collecting what I needed. A single hair from the baby's head, saliva from a pacifier, tiny samples that would either confirm Elena's story or blow it apart completely. When Elena left that afternoon, she thought she'd won. I could see it in the satisfied set of her shoulders, the way she kissed my cheek goodbye with genuine warmth for the first time in years. "I'm glad we're handling this like family," she said. Family. The word tasted bitter in my mouth. Sarah Chen worked fast. Within 48 hours, she had preliminary results from a private lab that specialized in paternity testing. Her call came early on a Friday morning while I was drinking coffee in Marcus's study, watching the sunrise through windows he'd cleaned just weeks before his death. "The baby isn't Marcus's," Sarah said without preamble. "But you probably already suspected that." Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by rage, so pure it made my hands shake. Relief that Marcus hadn't betrayed me, that his final words had been truth instead of lies. Rage that Elena had been willing to destroy his memory, and my grief for money. "There's more," Sarah continued. "I ran some additional tests, checked some public records. Want to guess who the baby's real father is?" I already knew, but I let her say it anyway. "David Thompson, Marcus's brother." The resemblance was throwing everyone off because they share family traits, but the DNA doesn't lie. David, who'd been acting strange at the funeral, who'd disappeared from family gatherings, who'd probably been just as shocked as anyone when Elena showed up with a baby that looked like both Thompson brothers. "There's something else," Sarah said, and her voice carried a note I hadn't heard before. Something that sounded almost like amusement. "I did some digging into your sister's finances. Want to know what I found?" Elena was broke. Completely, devastatingly broke. Her last divorce had cleaned her out, and she'd been living on credit cards and charm for the past 18 months. The designer clothes, the perfect makeup, the confidence, it was all an elaborate facade hiding desperate circumstances. She needed Marcus's money because without it, she was looking at bankruptcy, possible criminal charges for the debts she'd accumulated, and a future that looked nothing like the life she'd been pretending to live. "She's been planning this for months," Sarah explained. "I found evidence that she's been researching the estate, talking to lawyers, probably trying to figure out how to make a claim. When she got pregnant with David's baby and saw the family resemblance, she saw her chance." The audacity of it took my breath away. Elena had been willing to destroy relationships, manipulate grief, and commit fraud on a massive scale rather than get a job and rebuild her life honestly. But she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated me. Over the weekend, I planned my response with the same meticulous attention Marcus had brought to his business deals. Every detail mattered. Every move had to be perfect. I called Elena on Monday morning. "I want to formalize our agreement," I told her, "about splitting the estate. Harold wants to meet with both of us, make sure everything's legal and above board." Elena's excitement was audible. "That's wonderful. I knew you'd see reason. Madison deserves her father's legacy, and I want to make sure she gets it." We scheduled the meeting for Wednesday afternoon at Harold's office downtown. Elena would bring all her documentation. I would bring mine. What she didn't know was that Harold had already seen the DNA results. What she didn't know was that Sarah Chen had compiled a complete report on her financial situation, her fraudulent claims, and her pattern of deception stretching back years. What she didn't know was that I'd stopped being the grieving widow who could be manipulated and had become something much more dangerous. The meeting was set for 2 o'clock in Harold's mahogany-paneled conference room overlooking the city. I arrived early, spreading my evidence across the polished table like cards in a winning hand. Elena was 10 minutes late, probably calculating that a small delay would make her seem more important, more in control. She swept in wearing a black dress that probably cost more than most people's rent, carrying the baby and projecting an air of injured dignity. "I hope this won't take too long," she said, settling into her chair. "Madison has a doctor's appointment later." Harold looked at her over his reading glasses with the expression of a man who'd seen every variety of human greed in his long career. "This shouldn't take long at all." Elena spread her documents across the table. Birth certificate, medical records, photographs of her and Marcus together at family gatherings over the years. She'd built a compelling case for anyone who didn't look too closely. But we'd looked very closely indeed. "Before we discuss any estate arrangements," Harold said carefully, "I need to ask you about the paternity of your daughter." Elena's hand moved to her throat, but she kept her voice steady. "I've already provided Marcus's name on the birth certificate. They were together. Madison is his child." "Were they together?" Harold asked. "Because according to medical records, Marcus was in the hospital receiving chemotherapy during the time frame when this baby would have been conceived." Elena's confident expression flickered. "He was in and out of treatment. There were periods when he was feeling better." This was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. I'd been with Marcus during every treatment, every recovery period, every moment of hope and despair. The timeline Elena was suggesting didn't just seem unlikely, it was impossible. Harold slid a folder across the table. "These are the DNA test results comparing Madison to samples from Marcus's personal effects." Elena went very still. The baby fussed at her arms, sensing the tension in the room. "The results are conclusive," Harold continued. "Madison is not Marcus Thompson's biological daughter." The silence stretched between us like a canyon. Elena stared at the folder without opening it, her face cycling through emotions I couldn't quite read. Finally, she looked up at me. "You had no right." Her voice was quiet, but there was something dangerous in it. Something that reminded me why I'd been afraid of her as a child, why I'd learned to hide my secrets and protect my dreams from her reaching hands. I had every right to protect my husband's memory from fraud. Elena's mask finally slipped completely. The sophisticated woman in the expensive dress disappeared, replaced by something raw and desperate. "You don't understand," she said, and her voice broke on the words.
"I'm drowning."
"I'm completely broke. The debts, the credit cards, the loans I can't pay back. I needed this money. So you decided to steal it." "I decided to survive." The words came out as a shout, making the baby cry. Elena rocked her automatically, but her eyes stayed locked on mine. "You've always had everything handed to you. The perfect marriage, the perfect house, the perfect life. You don't know what it's like to have nothing." "I know what it's like to lose everything that matters," I said quietly. "But I didn't try to steal someone else's life to replace it." Harold cleared his throat. "There's also the matter of the fraudulent birth certificate and the attempted inheritance fraud. These are serious criminal charges." Elena's face went white. She looked at the baby in her arms, then at me, and I saw something I'd never seen in her eyes before.
Fear.
Real, bone-deep terror. "What do you want?" she whispered. What did I want? For months, I'd been empty, hollow, going through the motions of living while feeling like I died along with Marcus. But sitting in this conference room, watching Elena's carefully constructed lies collapse around her, I felt something stirring in the ruins of my grief. I wanted justice. I wanted truth. I wanted Elena to face consequences for once in her life instead of charming her way out of trouble and moving on to the next mark. But I also wanted something else. Something that surprised me with its intensity. I wanted to choose mercy. "I want you to tell me who Madison's real father is," I said. Elena closed her eyes. When she opened them again, they were full of tears that looked genuine for the first time since she'd walked into my kitchen. "David," she whispered. "It's David." The confession hung in the air between us. Harold made notes on his legal pad, but I barely noticed. I was thinking about David, Marcus's younger brother who'd struggled with addiction, with commitment, with taking responsibility for his choices. David, who probably had no idea he had a daughter. The baby had stopped crying and was looking around the room with those familiar gray eyes. Thompson family eyes. She was still Marcus's niece, still connected to the family by blood, just not in the way Elena had claimed. "Does David know?" I asked. Elena shook her head. "I was going to tell him, but then Marcus got sick and I realized Madison looked so much like him, like Marcus, and with the estate." "You saw an opportunity." "I saw a way out." Elena's voice was barely audible. "I know that doesn't excuse what I did. I know it was wrong. But I was desperate." Harold leaned forward. "The question now is whether Mrs. Thompson wants to press charges." Elena's eyes snapped to mine, wide with panic. "Please. I'll do anything. I'll pay back every cent I've taken. I'll disappear if you want. Just please don't send me to prison." Madison needs her mother. Madison needed more than that. She needed stability, security, a chance at a life that wasn't built on lies and desperation. She needed her real father to step up and take responsibility. But she also needed Elena. Whatever else my sister was, she genuinely loved this baby. I could see it in the way she held her, the protective instincts that had nothing to do with money or schemes. I looked at Harold. "What are my options?" "Legally, you could pursue criminal charges for fraud, forgery, and attempted theft. Civil court for damages. She'd likely serve time and owe significant restitution. And if I don't, then we make sure she signs documents acknowledging that she has no claim to Marcus's estate, no future claims, and that any money she's already received gets returned. We also require her to contact David and inform him of his paternity." Elena was nodding before Harold finished speaking. "Yes. Anything. I'll sign whatever you want. But I wasn't done yet. There was something else I needed to say, something that had been building in my chest since the day she'd walked into my kitchen with her lies and her baby. I want you to know something, I said, and Elena looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. Marcus never betrayed me. Not once, not ever. Even when he was dying, even when he was in pain and scared and not entirely coherent, he told me I was the only woman he'd ever loved. And now I know he was telling the truth. Elena's face crumpled. I'm sorry.
I'm so sorry.
I know that doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know that I never meant to hurt you. You just put yourself first. Like always. She nodded, accepting the judgment because she couldn't deny it. Harold spent the next hour drawing up the papers Elena needed to sign. Admissions of fraud, relinquishment of all claims to the estate, agreements to make restitution, and contact David within 48 hours. Elena signed everything without reading it carefully, her hands shaking as she wrote her name over and over again. When it was finished, she gathered up the baby and her purse, moving like someone in a dream state. At the door of the conference room, she stopped and looked back at me. For what it's worth, she said, Marcus was lucky to have you. I always envied what you two had together. Then she was gone, leaving nothing behind but the lingering scent of expensive perfume and the echo of confessions that had come too late to save her from herself. Harold and I sat in silence for several minutes after Elena left. Through the conference room windows, the city sprawled below us, full of people living their lives, making their choices, dealing with the consequences. Do you think she'll follow through? Harold asked. With contacting David?
She will.
She knows I'll be checking, and she knows what happens if she doesn't. And the money she's already spent. I thought about Elena's designer clothes, her perfect makeup, the facade she'd maintained while drowning in debt. Whatever she's taken, it's gone. But that's not what this was about. Harold nodded. He'd known Marcus long enough to understand what my husband would have wanted. Justice, but tempered with mercy. Truth, but not vengeance. A week later, David called me. His voice was shaky, uncertain, nothing like the confident young man who'd charmed everyone at family gatherings. I just found out, he said without preamble, about Madison, about what Elena did. How are you handling it? I don't know. I have a daughter. I'm a father. And I had no idea. His voice broke slightly. Elena said she tried to reach me when she first found out she was pregnant, but I was in rehab. I've been clean for 8 months now. This was news to me. David's struggles with addiction had been an open secret in the family, but I hadn't known he was getting treatment. I want to do right by Madison, he continued. I want to be her father. But I also know Elena doesn't have any money for support, and I'm just starting to get my life together. I'm working construction, living in a studio apartment. It's not much. An idea had been forming in my mind over the past week, something that felt right in a way I couldn't fully explain. What if I helped? I said. David went quiet. Then, carefully, what do you mean? Madison is Marcus's niece.
She's family.
Marcus would have wanted to help his brother's daughter, especially if his brother was trying to do the right thing. You do that? After what Elena tried to pull. I'd do it for Madison. And for you, if you're serious about being a father to her. We talked for another hour, working out details. David would establish paternity legally, get custody arrangements sorted out with Elena, start building a relationship with his daughter. I would set up a trust fund for Madison's education and future needs, administered through Harold's office to ensure the money was used appropriately. It wasn't the $25 million Elena had tried to steal, but it was enough to give Madison security and opportunity. Enough to help David transition into fatherhood without drowning financially. When I hung up the phone, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. Marcus's estate would remain intact, eventually going to charities and causes we'd discussed together. Elena's fraud was exposed and stopped before it could succeed. Madison would grow up knowing her real father and having the resources she needed for a good life. But most importantly, Marcus's memory was protected. The man I'd loved, the marriage we'd built together, the promises we'd made to each other. None of that had been a lie. Elena called me once more, about a month after the confrontation in Harold's office. Her voice was different, smaller somehow, stripped of the artificial confidence she'd worn like armor. "I wanted to thank you," she said, "for not pressing charges, for helping David with Madison. How are you doing?"
I'm
"Figuring it out. I'm living in a studio apartment, working retail. It's not glamorous, but it's honest work." She paused. "I'm in therapy too, trying to understand why I've spent my whole life looking for shortcuts instead of just doing the work." This was the most self-aware I'd ever heard Elena sound. Maybe rock bottom had finally taught her something that all her previous success hadn't. What about Madison? "David's great with her. Better than I expected. We have joint custody, and he's really stepping up. She's lucky to have him as a father." "She's lucky to have you too. Whatever else happened, you love her." Elena's voice broke slightly.
Ida.
"More than I've ever loved anything. That's what makes what I tried to do so horrible. I could have ruined her life for money." We talked for a few more minutes, carefully, like strangers learning to trust each other. When we hung up, I thought about forgiveness and family and the complicated ways people could hurt each other while still caring deeply. Elena had betrayed me in the most painful way possible, but she was still my sister. Madison was still my husband's niece. David was still Marcus's brother. Family was messy and complicated, and sometimes destructive. But it was also capable of healing, of growth, of finding new ways to love each other despite past mistakes. 6 months later, I received a photo in the mail. Madison at her first birthday party, surrounded by family. David holding her while she reached for birthday candles, Elena smiling beside them, Harold and his wife in the background having been invited as honorary grandparents. On the back, Elena had written a simple message: "Thank you for giving us a chance to be better." I put the photo on my mantle next to the pictures of Marcus and me, different chapters of the same family story. The house felt less empty now, filled not just with memories, but with hope for the future. Marcus was gone, and that loss would always be part of me. But his legacy lived on in Madison's trust fund, in David's sobriety and fatherhood, in Elena's slow journey toward becoming a better person. And in me, learning to build a new life that honored what we'd had together while remaining open to whatever came next. Sometimes love meant fighting for the truth. Sometimes it meant choosing mercy over vengeance. Sometimes it meant trusting that people could change, even when they'd hurt you deeply. Marcus had always said I was stronger than I knew. It took his death and Elena's betrayal for me to finally believe him. The gray eyes in Madison's photos looked exactly like his. But when I studied them carefully, I could see something else there too. Something hopeful and innocent and completely her own. The future, looking back at me with curiosity instead of accusation. It was enough.